Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku found the ability forge. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The assault was a physical assault. It caked his lips, crusted in his eyebrows, and mixed with the sweat on his neck to form a gritty, irritating paste. It was the perfume of Dagoba Municipal Beach, a miasma of brine, decay, and the metallic tang of 1,000 tons of rusting junk. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the smell of penance. His muscles screamed. Not the satisfying burn of productive training, but the dull, grinding ache of thankless, repetitive labor. He gripped the handles of a dilapidated shopping cart, its wheels half sunk in the wet, dark sand, and heaved. The cart, laden with sodden cardboard and a constellation of shattered glass bottles, groaned in protest. For a moment, it held fast, an anchor of misery in a sea of filth. Izuku's teeth gritted, his thin arms trembling with a strain they weren't built for. Useless. The word, a familiar ghost, whispered in his ear. It wasn't his own voice. It was deeper, rougher, laced with the crackle of tiny explosions. You're worse than these rejects, Deku. You're quirkless. A pebble on the side of the road. He gave another desperate heave. The wheels screeched and broke free from the sand's grip. He stumbled forward, his worn-out sneakers slipping on a patch of slick algae. The cart rattled precariously, and he winced, imagining the sound of the bottles shattering further, creating more work for himself. For a 14-year-old boy, his shoulders were already hunched with the weight of a lifetime of inadequacy. Today, that weight felt heavier than the rusted refrigerator he'd spent the morning trying to budge. It had been 3 months since the worst day. 3 months since Bakugo Katsuki, his childhood friend, the boy he'd once so admired, had looked at him with nothing but bored contempt. 3 months since he'd scorched Izuku's latest hero analysis notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13, and tossed it out a window. 3 months since he'd delivered the line that had become the new, venomous soundtrack to Izuku's life. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof. Even now, the memory was a physical blow. It knocked the wind from his lungs, made his stomach clench into a tight, acid-filled knot. He could still feel the phantom heat of the explosion near his face, still smell the acrid smoke of burnt paper, still hear the sycophantic laughter of Bakugo's cronies. He hadn't told his mother. He couldn't. How could he explain to the woman who had cried and apologized for his quirklessness that someone had suggested he end his life over it? The shame was a lead coat he couldn't take off, so he'd come here. After retrieving his soggy, blackened notebook from the koi pond, a new and terrible resolve had settled in his heart. All Might, on his debut, had said he'd saved 100 people in a bus crash. He'd smiled while doing it. Izuku couldn't save anyone. He couldn't even stand up for himself. But he could do this. He could clean. He could take this forgotten, polluted stretch of coastline and make it better. It was a pointless, Sisyphean task. The tides brought in new trash every day. But it was something. It was a way to punish his body for the crime of being born wrong, and a desperate, silent prayer that doing something, anything, heroic might somehow make him worthy. He finally wrestled the shopping cart up the slight incline to the roadside, emptying its contents into the designated public bins with a series of clatters and thuds. His back twinged in protest. He was just one boy. What he was doing was a single drop of water in a polluted ocean. He knew it was insane. But it was the only thing keeping the echo of Bakugo's words from becoming a roar. The sky, which had been a hazy, humid gray all afternoon, was beginning to curdle. The clouds thickened and darkened, their bellies a bruised purple. The air grew heavy, charged with a strange, electric stillness. The cries of the gulls became more frantic as they wheeled inland. A storm was coming. A bad one. Izuku glanced at the mountains of trash still dominating the beach. He'd made a pact with himself, one large item moved per day. His target for today was the refrigerator, a hulking, rust-eaten monolith half buried near the base of the largest junk pile. He was probably too tired, and the coming storm made it foolish, but the thought of going home and facing the sympathetic but pitying look in his mother's eyes was worse. He trudged back down to the sand, the first fat drops of rain beginning to fall, each one landing with a dark, heavy splat. The wind picked up, whipping his green-black hair into his eyes and carrying with it the smell of ozone. He reached the refrigerator and planted his feet, leaning his shoulder into its cold, wet side. "Come on!" he grunted, pushing with all his might. The metal groaned, but it didn't budge. He felt that familiar sting behind his eyes, the hot rush of frustration and despair. "Just move!" A rumble, low and guttural, answered him. It wasn't his own voice. It was the sky. A flash of brilliant white light forked across the bay, followed an instant later by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very sand beneath his feet. The rain, no longer teasing, began to fall in earnest, a torrential, blinding downpour. Izuku stumbled back from the refrigerator, wiping rain and tears from his face. The wind howled, a mournful, angry shriek. It tore at the precarious mountain of scrap metal, plastic, and wood he was standing beside. He heard a high-pitched metallic screech, a sound of stressed metal giving way. His head snapped up. The giant pile of trash, destabilized by the wind and rain and his own futile efforts against the refrigerator at its base, was shifting. A large, rusted-out car chassis near the top tilted, its weight pulling a cascade of smaller objects with it. It was like a slow-motion avalanche of failure. "No, no, no!" Izuku scrambled backward, falling onto the wet sand as the entire section of the junk heap collapsed with a deafening roar of groaning metal and splintering wood. The refrigerator he'd been pushing was swallowed whole, buried under a new wave of refuse. The ground shuddered. He lay there for a long moment, soaked to the bone, the cold rain plastering his t-shirt to his skin. All that work undone in an instant. The universe, it seemed, was laughing at him. He pushed himself up to a sitting position, ready to just give up and let the storm wash him away. But as his eyes adjusted to the new, chaotic landscape of the trash slide, he saw something. Where the bulk of the junk had been, there was now a dark, gaping void. The collapse hadn't just moved the trash, it had revealed something underneath. A hole. A cave entrance, perfectly framed by the wreckage, hidden from sight for who knew how many years. Curiosity, that dogged, academic part of him that even Bakugo couldn't extinguish, stirred in his chest. It was a stupid, dangerous idea. The pile could shift again. But the cave was a mystery, a secret, and Izuku Midoriya had always been a sucker for secrets. He got to his feet, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, and cautiously approached the opening. The rain was letting up slightly, but a steady curtain of water dripped from the twisted metal lintel above the entrance. The air wafting out was different from the beach air. It was cool, dry, and ancient. It smelled of stone and earth and something else, something that reminded him of the electric tang of the air right before a lightning strike. He hesitated for only a second before ducking under a jagged piece of rebar and stepping inside. The transition was immediate and startling. The roar of the wind and rain muted to a distant whisper. The cave was small, no bigger than his bedroom, with a low, arched ceiling. It was utterly dark, save for a faint, impossible light emanating from the center of the chamber. Izuku's breath hitched. He took a slow, shuffling step forward, his eyes wide. There, in the middle of the stone floor, sat an anvil. It was made of a substance that seemed to drink the darkness, a polished, obsidian-like stone, smooth and unblemished by time. It wasn't large, perhaps only 2 feet long, but it possessed a density, a presence, that made the small cave feel like a cathedral. Resting atop its flat surface was a hammer. It was simple, almost primitive, with a head of the same dark stone and a handle that looked like it was carved from petrified wood, and they were glowing. It wasn't a harsh light. It was a soft, internal luminescence, a gentle, blue-white pulse that throbbed in time with a rhythm he could feel more than hear. It was the light of a star-filled night sky, of a deep ocean trench, of a power that felt older than the sea itself. He stared, mesmerized. This was no natural formation. This was an artifact, something left behind. Something, waiting. He didn't know how long he stood there, watching the soft ebb and flow of the light. His mind, usually a whirlwind of analysis and frantic thought, was blessedly, terrifyingly silent. An inexplicable pull, a quiet but insistent song in his blood, drew him forward. He reached out a trembling hand, not to touch it, but just to feel the air around it. It was warm, humming with a latent energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. What was this? A forgotten art installation? Some strange quirk's lingering effect? His gaze fell upon a piece of scrap metal near his feet, a twisted shard that had been flung into the cave by the collapse. It was a piece of a car door, maybe. Jagged, rusted, worthless. He picked it up. It was cold and damp in his hand. He looked from the metal in his hand to the glowing anvil. The pull intensified. It wasn't a thought, not a conscious decision. It was an instinct he never knew he possessed, a deep, primal urge to make. He stepped forward and placed the piece of scrap on the anvil's surface. The moment it made contact, the light in the anvil flared, a soft whoosh of sound echoing in the small chamber. The light flowed from the anvil into the metal, causing the rust to flake away and the jagged edges to soften, as if the anvil were assessing it. Izuku reached for the hammer. Its handle was cool and smooth, fitting into his palm as if it were molded for him. As his fingers closed around it, a sudden, dizzying rush of information flooded his mind. It wasn't words or images, but a pure, conceptual understanding, analysis, intent, material, transformation. The simple, powerful logic of it settled into his bones. He needed a blueprint, an analysis. His mind, now kicking back into its usual frantic gear, scrambled for something to use. He didn't want to try anything big, anything powerful. He was scared. This felt too real, too dangerous. He needed something simple. Something harmless. His thoughts snagged on a memory from a few months ago. A minor pro-hero he'd seen stopping a purse snatcher. The hero's quirk was laughably simple. He could extend his fingers up to 2 feet. Izuku had been fascinated, not by the power, but the mechanics. He'd spent a whole evening theorizing in his notebook. Elasticity quirk, Eberiyubi. Possible mechanism. Hyper-specialized collagen matrix within the phalanges, activated by a specific neural impulse, allowing for rapid cell elongation and reinforcement. Not true stretching, but a form of rapid, localized growth and retraction. He gripped the hammer, his knuckles white. He lifted it. It felt impossibly heavy, as if it were channeling the weight of his own doubt. He focused on the memory of his analysis, on the intricate biological blueprint he had imagined. He pictured the scrap metal on the anvil not as it was, but as a tool that could replicate that function. He pictured a small, compact charm that, when activated, would extend into a rigid pull. He swung the hammer. The moment of impact was silent. There was no clang of stone on metal. There was only a flash of blinding, cerulean light that consumed the cave, and a powerful, concussive force that threw him off his feet. He landed hard on the stone floor, his head cracking against the ground. His vision swam with dancing spots of light. A profound, soul-deep exhaustion washed over him, 100 times worse than the fatigue from cleaning the beach. It felt as if something essential had been siphoned directly from his core. Gasping, his body trembling, he pushed himself up. The light from the anvil and hammer had dimmed back to its gentle, rhythmic pulse. The large piece of scrap metal was gone. In its place, sitting innocently on the anvil's surface, was a small, smooth, metallic charm, no bigger than his thumb. It was gunmetal gray, cool to the touch, and inscribed with a single, faint line down its center. He stared at it, his heart hammering against his ribs. Was he hallucinating? Did he hit his head that hard? With a shaking hand, he picked it up. It felt solid. Real. He held it in his palm, his thumb hovering over the inscribed line. He took a deep breath, and pressed. Click. The charm didn't just extend. It burst into existence. In less than a second, it elongated with a sharp, pneumatic hiss, transforming from a tiny piece of metal into a perfectly straight, 5-foot-long, rigid pole. He was so surprised he nearly dropped it. He held it, a makeshift bow staff, his mind reeling. It was light but incredibly strong. He tapped it against the cave wall. It made a solid thwack. He had done it. He had replicated Eberiyubi's quirk. The elation was a dizzying, intoxicating wave. It was more potent than any praise, more real than any dream. For a single, glorious moment, he felt powerful. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the pole dissolved. It didn't break or bend. It simply crumbled in his hands, collapsing into a shower of fine, gray dust that sifted through his fingers and disappeared before it even hit the ground. Izuku stared at his empty, trembling hands. Single use. And the exhaustion, the cost was real. It was a transaction. His energy, his stamina, his life force, for a temporary miracle. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and unrestrained. They weren't the tears of sadness or frustration he was so used to. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy and disbelief. He laughed, a choked, hysterical sound that echoed strangely in the ancient cave. I did it, he whispered, his voice cracking. I did it. This wasn't a quirk he was born with. This was something else. This was a power he had found. A power that took his greatest, most ridiculed asset, his obsessive, analytical mind, and made it tangible. His notebooks weren't just the ramblings of a pathetic fanboy anymore. They were blueprints. They were schematics. They were a grimoire of power. The exhaustion was still a lead weight in his limbs, but a manic, feverish energy was now coursing through his veins. The first test was a success. He had to try again. He had to know if it was a fluke. He needed something more complex, something more heroic. His mind immediately jumped to the top tier. Endeavor? All Might? No, he immediately dismissed them. He barely understood how their quirks worked, and the mere thought of trying to replicate that level of power made the dregs of energy in his body scream in protest. He needed something he understood intimately. He scrambled out of the cave, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He fumbled for his backpack, which he'd left near the edge of the junk pile. He unzipped it and pulled out the sacred, battered text, Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. Its cover was warped, and its pages were crinkly from their bath in the koi pond, the All Might sticker on the front peeling at the edges. He flipped through the damp pages with a reverence he usually reserved for All Might footage. His fingers flew past his analyses of Mount Lady, Death Arms, and others. Then he found it. A multi-page spread, filled with detailed anatomical sketches, growth pattern projections, and tactical weaknesses. Kamui Woods. The wood-type quirk, Arbor, was one Izuku had been obsessed with for years. The ability to generate and control wood from one's own body was incredible. Izuku's notes were exhaustive, theories on accelerated cellulose production, lignin control for hardness, the necessary nutrient intake. He knew this quirk, analytically, almost as well as his own name. His eyes scanned the wreckage around him. He needed material. Wood. He spotted a piece of driftwood, bleached by the sun and smoothed by the sea, half buried in the sand. It was perfect. He grabbed it and stumbled back into the cave, his body screaming at him. The exhaustion was getting worse. His vision was starting to tunnel, and a low hum vibrated behind his eardrums. He knew this was a terrible idea. He knew he was pushing himself past a dangerous limit. He didn't care. He threw the driftwood onto the anvil. The blue-white light flared again, seeming to embrace the wood. He grabbed the hammer, his grip slick with a mixture of rainwater and sweat. This time, the hammer felt 10 times heavier. Lifting it was an act of pure, desperate will. He focused. He poured every ounce of his remaining consciousness into the mental image of his Kamui Woods analysis. He pictured the intertwining fibers, the rapid growth, the strength and flexibility. He didn't envision a simple tool this time. He envisioned something he could wear. A bracelet. A wooden bracelet that, when activated, would unleash a binding liana, his own small-scale version of Kamui's lacquered chain prison. He poured everything into the intent. His hopes, his dreams, his desperation, his rage at Bakugo, his yearning to be a hero, it all swirled into a vortex of pure, focused desire. He was so drained he could feel his heartbeat faltering. The world was turning gray at the edges. With a final, agonized cry that was torn from the very depths of his soul, he brought the hammer down. The flash was not blue this time. It was a brilliant, verdant green, the color of new spring leaves. The light was so intense it felt solid, pressing him back. The energy drain was absolute. It was like a plug being pulled from the bottom of his soul. His strength, his consciousness, his very life force rushed out of him and into the forge. His last coherent thought was of the object now sitting on the anvil. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bracelet, glowing with a soft, green light. A perfect, tangible piece of his dream. His eyes rolled back in his head. The world dissolved into a silent, welcoming darkness. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had just forged his own destiny, collapsed unconscious onto the cold stone floor of the hidden cave. He lay there, utterly spent, while outside the storm began to pass, and the world remained oblivious to the fact that it had just changed forever. The first thing Izuku became aware of was the cold. It was a deep, biting chill that had seeped into his bones, a stark contrast to the memory of brilliant, life-green light. The stone floor of the cave was an unforgiving mattress, and every muscle in his body felt like a tightly wound, frayed cable. He groaned, a dry, pathetic sound, and the simple act of turning his head sent a wave of dizziness through him. His mouth tasted like static and dust. A faint, rhythmic blue-white light pulsed in the darkness, and the memory of what happened crashed back into him not as a gentle wave but as a tidal force. The anvil. The hammer. The wood. The green flash. He shot up into a sitting position, a move his body immediately and violently protested. A sharp, splitting pain lanced behind his eyes, and the world tilted precariously. He braced himself with a hand on the floor, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He felt hollowed out. Empty. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was a profound, cellular depletion, as if he'd run a marathon on a molecular level, and he was starving. Not the normal, I missed a meal hunger. This was a ravenous, primal craving. His stomach felt like a collapsed cavern, and he could practically feel his body screaming for fuel, for calories, for anything to replenish the vast well of energy he had so recklessly expended. His eyes, struggling to focus in the dim light, fell upon his left wrist. There it was. Coiled snugly around his wrist was the bracelet. It was a deep, dark brown, almost black, with intricate, swirling patterns carved into its surface that seemed to follow the grain of the long-gone driftwood. A soft, residual green light pulsed faintly from within its depths, a tiny, sleeping emerald heart. It was beautiful. It was real. It was proof. He lifted his arm, his muscles trembling from the slight effort. He ran the fingers of his right hand over the bracelet's smooth, cool surface. It felt ancient and powerful, a stark contrast to the cheap, worn fabric of his school uniform. He had made this. From a piece of sea-tossed wood and a page of his own frantic scribbles, he had created an object of power. He, Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless, useless Deku, had forged a miracle. A laugh, weak but genuine, escaped his lips. The sheer, unadulterated joy of it was a potent balm, momentarily soothing the gnawing ache in his body. He had a power. It wasn't a quirk. It wasn't something he was born with. It was something he had found, something he had earned through his own intellect and obsession. His greatest weakness, his nerdy, analytical nature, was now the key to his greatest strength. The pressing need for secrecy came next, a cold dose of reality. He couldn't go home like this. He couldn't let his mother see him so drained, so pale. He looked at the bracelet. It was too conspicuous. With a pang of regret, he slipped it off his wrist and tucked it carefully into the inner pocket of his blazer. Without it, he just looked like a kid who had played too hard and fallen in the mud. A familiar costume. The journey home was a hazy, stumbling ordeal. Every step was a negotiation with his protesting limbs. The world seemed too bright, the sounds too loud. When he finally fumbled with the key to his apartment door, his hands were shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to get it in the lock. "Izuku? Is that you?" His mother's voice, warm and worried, drifted from the kitchen. "You're so late. I was starting to, oh my goodness!" Inko Midoriya rounded the corner and stopped dead, a gasp escaping her lips. She took in his appearance. His uniform splattered with mud and soaked through, his face ashen gray beneath the grime, the dark circles under his eyes that looked like bruises. "Izuku! What happened to you? Did you fall? Are you hurt?" She rushed forward, her hands fluttering around him, checking for injuries. "I am fine, Mom," he stammered, trying to inject a strength he didn't feel into his voice. "I'm okay. I overdid it a little with the cleaning. Tried to move something too heavy and slipped. I'm just tired. It was a flimsy lie, but it was the best he could come up with. The truth was an impossible, fantastical boulder he couldn't hope to share. Her expression softened from alarm to deep concern, a look he knew all too well. It was the look she gave him whenever the world reminded him of his quirklessness. Oh, honey! You need to be more careful, she fretted, herding him toward the bathroom. Go get a hot shower. I'll get dinner ready. You look like you haven't eaten in a week. She wasn't wrong. After a long, hot shower where he practically had to lean against the tiled wall to stay upright, he emerged to the glorious smell of his favorite food, katsudon. His mother had made a portion that could have fed a small family. He sat down at the table and ate with a ferocity that startled even himself. He devoured the entire bowl, then a second, and was halfway through a third before the gnawing void in his stomach finally began to subside. Inko watched him, a mixture of relief and worry in her eyes. My goodness, Izuku. It's good to see you with such an appetite, but are you sure you're alright? Just really hungry, Mom, he said between mouthfuls, avoiding her gaze. The guilt of the lie was a sour counterpoint to the deliciousness of the pork. But what choice did he have? That night, sleep offered no rest. His mind raced, a high-speed montage of glowing anvils, detailed schematics, and the exhilarating, terrifying feeling of power flowing out of him. He clutched the wooden bracelet in his hand under the covers, its presence a solid, reassuring anchor in the storm of his thoughts. He had discovered a new continent, and now he had to learn how to survive on it. The next day, school was a blur. He couldn't focus on lectures about history or mathematics. His mind was elsewhere, in a hidden seaside cave, already planning his next steps. He scribbled in a fresh notebook, not about heroes, but about the forge itself. The ability forge rules of use, theorized. Rule 1, an analysis is required. The quality/accuracy of the forged item is directly proportional to the detail of my analysis. A vague idea won't work. Rule 2, material matters. I used metal for the pole, wood for the vine. Does the base material influence the final product? Need to test. Rule 3, there is a cost. Severe stamina/energy drain. Proportional to the complexity/power of the quirk being replicated. Felt like I was dying after the Kamui Woods attempt. Must be careful. Need to quantify this. Rule 4, single use. The items disintegrate after one activation. This means I need an arsenal, not a single tool. As soon as the final bell rang, he was out the door, ignoring the sneers from Bakugo's direction. He had a new purpose. Dagoba Beach was no longer his place of penance. It was his secret laboratory. Over the next several weeks, Izuku fell into a grueling, secret routine. School, then a quick stop home to change and grab his notebooks, then hours at the beach. He continued to clean the trash, but now with a new motivation. Every piece of scrap metal, every broken piece of plastic, every waterlogged piece of wood was a potential resource. He sorted his findings, creating small, hidden caches of materials near his cave. The cave itself became his sanctuary. He spent hours inside, experimenting, learning, failing. His first major failure came when he tried to replicate a minor fire quirk he'd seen a hero use to light rescue beacons. His analysis was flimsy, based on a single news clip. Generates heat and flame from fingertips. Probably a form of specialized chemical reaction. It was lazy, and the forge punished him for it. He placed a lump of coal on the anvil and swung the hammer. The energy drain was minimal, but the result was pathetic. He was left with a small, black rock that grew slightly warm to the touch for about 10 seconds before crumbling into soot. Lesson learned, he wrote furiously in his new notebook. Surface-level analysis creates a surface-level effect. I need to understand the how and why, not just the what. His next attempt was more ambitious, and far more dangerous. He turned to his notes on Empty Lady. Gigantification. The ultimate power fantasy. He knew it was stupid. He knew he was playing with fire, but he had to know the limits. He didn't try to make something to grow himself. The potential consequences were too horrifying to consider. Instead, he took a small All Might action figure, a cheap plastic one he'd bought at a convenience store, and placed it on the anvil. He focused on his detailed analysis of Empty Lady's quirk, a complex theory involving mass shifting and cellular expansion borrowing from pocket dimensions. He lifted the hammer. The sheer weight of the intent was staggering. It felt like he was trying to lift a car. Just raising the hammer a few inches made his vision swim and his knees buckle. The energy drain was immediate and terrifying, a siphon opening up at the base of his soul. He abandoned the attempt instantly, dropping the hammer with a clatter. He stumbled back, gasping, sweat beading on his forehead. The all-might figure on the anvil had distorted, its heroic smile melted into a grotesque plastic grimace. Lesson learned, he wrote with a shaking hand. Power scaling is a hard limit. The forge cannot replicate high-tier, reality-bending quirks. Or if it can, the cost is my life. I must think smaller, more practical. I'm not copying quirks. I'm translating their fundamental principles into limited, single-use physical phenomena. He changed his entire approach. He wasn't a god of creation, he was an engineer. A craftsman. He focused on smaller, utility-based quirks. He found his analysis of a low-level hero whose quirk, sound pop, allowed her to create a disorienting sonic burst. His notes were meticulous, detailing the necessary air pressure, the specific frequency to affect the inner ear, the rapid displacement of atmosphere. He took a handful of wet clay from a puddle on the beach, shaped it into a small pellet, and placed it on the anvil. He focused on the physics, not the magic. He swung the hammer. The drain was manageable, like a brisk sprint. The result was a small, hardened ceramic ball. He took it outside the cave and threw it against a pile of rusted metal. Bang! The sound was sharp and loud, a concussive pop that made his own ears ring. It was a perfect, palm-sized flash bang. He grinned, a wide, triumphant smile. This was it. This was the way forward. Not overwhelming power, but clever, tactical ingenuity. His body began to change. The grueling work of cleaning the beach combined with the constant, draining cycle of forging and recovering was reshaping him. The scrawny, soft boy was being stripped away, replaced by someone leaner, harder. Wiry muscles defined his arms and back. He was still small, but there was a new density to him, a resilience born of constant effort. One afternoon, months after his discovery, the world decided to test him. He was walking home, his mind buzzing with designs for a hardened gauntlet based on Kirishima's middle school debut footage, when he saw the plumes of smoke and heard the familiar crackle of explosions. A crowd had gathered, phones held aloft, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid excitement. A villain attack. He pushed his way through the throng, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. He saw the familiar forms of the heroes on the scene. Death Arms was trying to punch his way through the crowd, but people were in the way. Kamui Woods was on a rooftop, but the alley was too narrow and on fire, making his quirk a liability. The situation was contained, but stagnant. Then he saw the villain. A monstrous, amorphous being of green sludge, its body churning and bubbling. And trapped inside it, thrashing and fighting for his life, was a boy with spiky, ash-blonde hair. Bakugo. Izuku's blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Bakugo, the invincible, explosive prodigy, was suffocating. His explosions were firing off randomly, uncontrolled, setting fire to the surrounding storefronts and making it impossible for the heroes to get close. Izuku could see his face, his red eyes wide with a terror and desperation Izuku had never seen in him before. It was the look of someone who was drowning, and nobody was doing anything. The heroes were waiting for someone with the right quirk. The crowd was just watching. Recording. Izuku's own past flashed before his eyes. All the taunts. The burns. The casual cruelty. Take a swan dive off the roof! A part of him, a dark, resentful part, should have felt a sliver of satisfaction, but it didn't. All he saw was his childhood friend, a boy he had once followed everywhere, dying. He looked at the helpless heroes. He looked at Bakugo's pleading, terrified eyes. And then his own feet were moving. It was the same muscle memory that had propelled him in the original version of this day. The desperate, heroic impulse of a boy who couldn't stand by and watch someone suffer. But this time, something was different. As his legs pumped, carrying him past the police barricade and into the danger zone. His mind wasn't blank with panic. It was racing, calculating. What can I do? What do I have? His right hand instinctively went to his blazer pocket, where he had started carrying one or two of his more stable creations. His fingers brushed past the sound pop pellet and closed around the familiar, smooth surface of the wooden bracelet he had forged on that first, fateful day. Kamui Woods. He had seen the real Kamui on the roof, unable to act. But Izuku's creation wasn't a large-scale capture technique. It was a single, precision tool. The sludge villain was a fluid, its form constantly shifting, making it impossible to get a solid grip. But it had eyes. 2 large, yellow, bulbous eyes that bobbed sickeningly in the green muck. A target. No, you idiot! Stop! He heard Death Arms shout behind him. He didn't listen. The world seemed to slow down. He could see the path, a 20-meter dash through fire and chaos. As he ran, he slipped the bracelet onto his left wrist. He saw Bakugo's eyes meet his for a split second. The look in them wasn't anger. It was sheer, uncomprehending shock. DKU? Bakugo's voice was a choked, gurgling cry. Izuku was 5 meters away. He raised his left arm, aiming at the villain's right eye. He poured his will into the bracelet, the same intent he had used to forge it. Bind. Constrict. Distract. He activated it. There was no grand transformation. Just a flash of brilliant green light from his wrist. A single, thick liana, dark as bark and impossibly fast, shot out from the bracelet. It wasn't a clumsy branch. It was a targeted projectile, a living whip. It flew through the air and, with a wet, sickening thwomp, wrapped itself tightly around the villain's large, gelatinous eyeball. The sludge villain let out a silent, bubbling roar of pain and shock. Its entire form recoiled, its fluid body constricting in on itself for a crucial second. The suffocating grip on Bakugo's mouth and nose loosened. Bakugo gasped, a deep, desperate, rattling intake of air that was the most beautiful sound Izuku had ever heard. The liana, its single purpose served, began to smoke and char, the villain's corrosive body dissolving it. But it had done its job. It had created an opening. It had bought a second, and a second was all he needed. I really am pathetic, a booming voice declared. Izuku felt a massive gust of wind as a towering figure landed between him and the villain. All Might. He stood there, his back to the boys, his signature smile somehow seeming more grim than cheerful. I preach about the tenets of heroism, but I was not living them. He planted his feet, his muscles bulging. He pulled his arm back. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. He thrust his fist forward. Texas smash! The wind pressure was a physical wall. Izuku was blown off his feet, tumbling backward as a tornado of air pressure tore the sludge villain apart. The villain's body splattered against the alley walls, freeing Bakugo, who collapsed to the ground, coughing and heaving. Then, the sky opened up. The sheer change in barometric pressure from All Might's punch had caused the weather to turn. Rain began to fall, washing the green sludge from the streets and cooling the fires. Izuku lay on the wet asphalt, his ears ringing, his heart feeling like it was going to beat its way out of his chest. He had done it. He had run in. He had used his power. And he had made a difference. The aftermath was a blur of noise and motion. The heroes, once they'd recovered from their shock, swarmed him. They didn't praise him. They scolded him, their voices a cacophony of incredibly reckless, suicidal, and could have gotten yourself killed. He took it all, nodding numbly. They were right, of course. Then they turned to Bakugo, praising his powerful quirk, his endurance. Izuku watched as Bakugo got to his feet, his gaze fixed on Izuku. There was no gratitude. There was only a deep, simmering rage mixed with something new and unsettling, confusion. I didn't need your help. Bakugo snarled, his voice hoarse, before he was swept away by the paramedics. The words were the same, but the context was entirely different. I didn't need your help sounded a lot like how did you help? Izuku turned to leave, wanting nothing more than to disappear. To go back to his cave and process the hurricane that had just ripped through his life. Wait! The voice was quiet, but it carried an authority that stopped him cold. He turned. All Might, in his massive, muscular form, was blocking his path. The crowd, sensing a private moment, had given them a wide berth. The hero's signature smile was gone. His face, shadowed by the dreary evening light, was completely serious. The bright blue eyes, usually so full of warmth, were narrowed, analytical. Izuku's fanboy brain short-circuited. All Might. Talking to him. He opened his mouth to unleash a torrent of frantic praise, of questions, of sheer, unadulterated awe. All Might! You were amazing! The way you changed the weather with one punch. I've always wondered about the barometric pressure requirements for that. Is it related to the kinetic force or a secondary effect of one for? That was a foolish, reckless thing to do, young man. All Might interrupted, his voice a low rumble. The words shut Izuku's mouth with an audible click. You ran into a situation that seasoned professionals had deemed too dangerous. You could have been killed. Izuku's gaze dropped to the wet pavement, shame washing over him. I know. My legs, they just moved on their own, but... All Might continued, and Izuku looked up. It was also incredibly brave. You saw someone in need, and you acted. You were the only person on this street who did. He took a step closer, his massive frame looming over Izuku. The hero's intense gaze wasn't looking at a fan anymore. It was looking at a puzzle. You reminded me of what it truly means to be a hero. But I have to ask. All Might's voice lowered, becoming more pointed, more intense. He gestured vaguely toward the alley where the fight had happened. That trick with the vine. That was no support item I've ever seen. It came from the bracelet you were wearing, but the energy, it felt like a quirk. Izuku froze. His blood turned to ice in his veins. The lie he had told his mother, the half-truths he had prepared in his mind, all of them evaporated under the sheer intensity of the number one hero's scrutiny. All Might wasn't just making a casual observation. He was analyzing. He was dissecting the event, and he had spotted the anomaly. He had spotted him. Izuku's mouth went dry. He could feel the phantom weight of the now-dissolved bracelet on his wrist. All Might leaned in slightly, his blue eyes piercing through Izuku's feeble defenses, searching for the truth. What was that, young man? All Might asked, his voice a quiet, unyielding demand. I've never seen a quirk like it. The question hung in the damp, rain-washed air between them, heavy and sharp as a guillotine. I've never seen a quirk like it. Izuku's mind, usually a superhighway of frantic thoughts, became a single-lane road with a 10-car pileup. All systems crashed. Before him stood All Might, the symbol of peace, his hero, his god. And that god was looking at him not with the distant, benevolent smile of a celebrity, but with the focused, piercing scrutiny of a detective who had just found a smoking gun. Every pre-prepared lie, every half-truth he had ever considered, turned to ash in his mouth. What could he say? He felt an absurd, hysterical bubble of laughter rise in his throat. Oh, that? Just a magic bracelet I made in a secret cave using a mystical anvil that turns my fandom notes into single-use superpowers. By the way, I'm quirkless. He would be carted off to a psychiatric ward before he could even mention the part about the debilitating life force drain. He had to say something. His silence was stretching, becoming an answer in itself. It's a support item. The words tumbled out, clumsy and unconvincing. He mentally kicked himself. It was the weakest, most transparent lie he could have chosen. A prototype. From a support company that works with new materials. It's battery-powered. All Might's expression didn't change. His smile remained absent, his eyes unwavering. He didn't look angry or disappointed. He just looked patient, like a teacher waiting for a student to arrive at the correct answer on his own. A battery. All Might repeated, his voice a low, placid rumble. The simple word made Izuku's entire fabrication sound like a child's fantasy. Young man, I have worked with David Shield, the greatest support item engineer on the planet. I have seen batteries the size of a fist that could power a skyscraper for an hour. I have also seen the energy signatures of hundreds of quirks. What I saw from your bracelet, that flash of green, the instantaneous generation of mass from nothing, that was no battery. That was biological. That was life. Izuku's breath hitched. Life. All Might hadn't just seen the effect, he'd sensed the cause. He'd sensed the cost. I'm not angry, All Might continued, his voice softening slightly, a crack of empathy in his granite facade. I am intrigued. And concerned. I told you that you reminded me of what it means to be a hero. A hero's foundation is courage, but it is built with trust. I am asking you to trust me. The sincerity in his voice was a key turning a lock in Izuku's chest that had been rusted shut for a decade. This wasn't an interrogation. It was an invitation. And then, something impossible happened. Poof! In a sudden, shocking gout of steam, the mountainous form of All Might deflated. The symbol of peace vanished, and in his place stood a man Izuku had never seen before. He was skeletal, almost hauntingly so, with sharp, angular features and shadowed eyes that seemed sunk into his skull. His oversized clothes hung off his frame like a shroud. A trickle of blood dribbled from the corner of his thin lips, which he wiped away with a bony hand. Izuku stared, his mind rebooting with a blue screen of utter confusion. You're deflating. Are you an imposter? Where did All Might go? The skeletal man sighed, a wheezing, rattling sound. I assure you, I am all me. He was cut off by a harsh, wet cough that racked his frail body. He clutched his side, his face contorting in pain. When he straightened, he lifted his shirt. Izuku gasped. A horrifying, sprawling scar tissue network dominated the man's left side. It was a vicious, starburst-shaped wound, puckered and ancient, a testament to a battle that should have killed any normal man. This is my true form, young man, the man said, his voice now thin and reedy, but still carrying the same core of authority. 5 years ago, I fought a villain who did this to me. I lost my stomach and half of my respiratory system. I've been wasting away ever since. He let his shirt fall. The great symbol of peace can only do his job for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, this is who I am. Tashinori Yagi. The name meant nothing to Izuku. The sight of the wound meant everything. This was the most closely guarded secret in the world, a secret that would shatter the fragile peace of their hero-centric society. And he, Izuku Midoriya, was being shown it. Why? I showed you my weakness, my truth, Tashinori said, his gaze intense. Because I saw something in you. Something beyond just bravery. I saw a desperation I recognized, and I saw a power that does not fit into any known category. Now I ask you again. Trust me. What was that you used? That was it. The dam broke. All the years of silent suffering, of bottled-up pain and humiliation, of desperate, lonely hope, it all came rushing out in a choked, ragged sob. Tears streamed down Izuku's face, mixing with the rain and the grime. He collapsed to his knees on the wet asphalt, his body shaking with the force of his own emotional release. I'm quirkless, he wailed, the words tearing from his throat, raw and painful. The doctor told me when I was 4. He said I had the extra toe joint. He told me to give up. He told All Might's emaciated form everything. He told him about his mother's tears, about his notebooks, about the decade of relentless bullying. He told him about Bakugo, the constant taunts of Deku, the casual explosions, the burnt notebook. His voice dropped to a near whisper as he recounted the final, cruelest cut. He told me if I wanted a quirk so bad, I should take a swan dive off the roof of the school. Tashinori's eyes, already wide, somehow grew wider. The air grew cold, and for a moment, Izuku could almost feel the phantom presence of the symbol of peace's fury emanating from the skeletal man. And I didn't know what to do, Izuku continued, his voice thick with tears. So I went to the beach. Dagoba. I thought, if I can't save people, maybe I can save a place. Maybe if I did something heroic, anything, it would make me feel less useless. And that's where I found it. He described the storm, the trash slide, the hidden cave. He described the glowing anvil and the simple stone hammer. He explained the inexplicable urge, the instinct to create. It's called the ability forge, he stammered, the name feeling strange and momentous on his tongue. I think that's its name. It showed me, in my head, it lets me take my analysis, all my notes, and turn them into real things. I take a piece of junk, and I think about a quirk I've analyzed, and I hit it with the hammer, and it makes something. Tashinori was silent, his expression unreadable. He looked like a man trying to comprehend a message from another dimension. Izuku, fearing he'd finally crossed the line into insanity, knew he had to prove it. He had to show him. I can show you, he said, scrambling to his feet. I can prove I'm not crazy. He looked around frantically. He needed a material, and a blueprint. He spotted a chunk of broken concrete on the ground, a piece of a curb shattered during the villain attack. He picked it up. It was rough and heavy in his hand. Now for the analysis. Something simple. Something harmless. His mind flashed to a news report about a civilian whose minor quirk allowed them to make small objects glow faintly. It was a form of bioluminescence, but focused into a non-biological host. His analysis had been brief but precise, theorizing about the conversion of kinetic energy into photonic emission within a crystalline structure. Concrete contained quartz. It could work. Okay, he mumbled, more to himself than to Tashinori. He knelt, placing the chunk of concrete on a flat, unbroken section of the pavement, a makeshift anvil. He picked up a smaller, fist-sized rock to use as a hammer. He closed his eyes, ignoring the skeletal hero watching him with baffling intensity. He focused, pushing past the adrenaline and the emotional turmoil. He visualized his analysis, the flow of energy, the activation of the crystalline matrix. He envisioned the rock in his hand not as a weapon, but as a catalyst. He felt the familiar, draining pull begin, a gentle tugging at his life force. He opened his eyes and swung the rock, striking the concrete with a sharp crack. There was no grand explosion of light, just a soft, pure white flash, like a camera flash, that momentarily illuminated his determined, tear-streaked face. The energy drain was sharp but shallow, like giving a pint of blood. He felt a wave of dizziness and swayed, catching himself on a nearby lamppost. His breath was coming in short, sharp bursts. Tashinori's gaze was fixed on the ground. The large chunk of concrete was gone. In its place sat a small, perfectly smooth, white stone, no bigger than a quail's egg. It pulsed with a gentle, steady light, casting soft shadows on the wet ground. It was a perfect, self-sustaining light source. A light pebble. Izuku reached down with a trembling hand and picked it up. See? He whispered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. He held it out on his open palm. It takes my energy. The more powerful the quirk I copy, the more it takes. The last one I made, it made me pass out. They only work once. As if on cue, the light in the pebble flickered and died. The stone went from smooth and white to rough and gray, and then crumbled into a pile of fine dust that the evening breeze scattered across the pavement. Izuku swayed again, his vision tunneling. The cost of 2 forges in one day, even minor ones, on top of the adrenaline crash, was too much. His legs gave out. He didn't hit the ground. A surprisingly strong, bony hand clamped onto his shoulder, holding him steady. He looked up into the face of Tashinori Yagi. The man was stunned. Utterly, completely, dumbfoundedly stunned. His jaw was slack, his sunken eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound, earth-shattering awe. He wasn't looking at a lying teenager or a delusional fanboy. He was looking at a living, breathing impossibility. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the distant city traffic and the dripping of rain from the awnings. Tashinori's mind, the mind of the world's greatest hero, was working furiously, connecting dots Izuku hadn't even known existed. The boy's obsessive muttering. The ridiculously detailed notebooks that everyone else dismissed as a creepy hobby. They weren't a symptom of his fandom. They were the fuel. The boy's intelligence, his analytical mind, his sheer dedication to understanding quirks, that was his power source. He didn't just study heroes. He reverse-engineered their very essence. He had, through sheer force of will and intellect, found a way to weaponize knowledge itself. Tashinori had come to this street today looking for a successor. He had been looking for a worthy vessel, an empty cup with a strong heart that he could fill with the sacred power of one for all. He had seen the boy's heroic impulse and thought, he is worthy despite being quirkless. Now a new, far more staggering thought struck him. He wasn't looking at an empty cup. He was looking at a boy who had already forged his own, a boy who, when the world told him he was powerless, had literally dug a power out of the earth with his bare hands. This wasn't just a good heart. This was the heart of a hero, fused with the mind of a genius inventor. A slow, genuine smile spread across Tashinori Yagi's gaunt face. It was the first true smile Izuku had seen from him, and it held more warmth and power than any of the bombastic grins from his muscle form. He let out a soft, breathy laugh, a sound of pure wonder. A swan dive off the roof, Tashinori murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. They told a boy who can create miracles from dust and desperation to throw his life away. He looked Izuku directly in the eye, and the power of the symbol of peace was back, burning brightly in his sunken gaze. Young man, you have proven me wrong. I came here to tell you that you could not be a hero without a quirk. But you already are one. Izuku's heart stopped. Your ingenuity, your analytical mind, your refusal to surrender, that is a power all its own. A magnificent, unheard-of power, Tashinori said, his voice ringing with conviction. But I also see the cost. I see the danger. That forge of yours will only take you so far. It is a razor's edge. To become the hero you've always dreamed of being, to save everyone with a smile just like I do, you'll need more. You'll need a foundation of power that doesn't drain you to the point of collapse. Tashinori stood up straight, his thin frame seeming to gain a foot in height. He spread his arms wide, a gesture of profound offering. The setting sun broke through the clouds behind him, framing his skeletal form in a halo of golden light. Young man, you moved me! Your story, your actions, your impossible ability. I deem you worthy. All that you have done has led you to this moment. Izuku stared, his mind unable to process the words, the shift from secret sharing to something more. My quirk is not just my own, Tashinori declared, his voice booming with a phantom echo of his muscle form's power. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next, a crystallization of power. It is called One for All. He clenched his fist, and a faint, electric aura of red and gold light flickered around his arm. And I am offering it to you. This power, combined with the power you have already forged for yourself, you can become the greatest hero of all time. So tell me, young Midoriya, he leaned forward, his face a mask of earnest, life-altering hope. You too can become a hero. Will you accept my power? The world fell away. There was only the setting sun, the skeletal man with fire in his eyes, and the question that redefined reality itself. The quirkless boy who could create quirks was being offered the greatest quirk of all. It was a confluence of fate so impossible, so perfect, it felt like the punchline to a cosmic joke. Izuku's answer was not a word. It was a sob, a nod, a complete and total surrender to the dream he had never, ever let die. The dawn was cold. The salt spray was a familiar, unwelcome kiss on Izuku's cheek. He stood on the shore of Dagoba Municipal Beach, but it looked different. It was no longer a graveyard of forgotten things. It was a training ground. An armory. A future. Beside him, Tashinori Yagi, looking even more skeletal in the harsh morning light, gestured to the mountains of trash with a sweeping arm. This is it, my boy, he announced with a wheezing cheerfulness. The aim to pass. American Dream Plan. You will clean this entire section of the beach in the next 10 months. This will train your body, turning it into a suitable vessel for One for All. If you tried to inherit it now, your limbs would pop right off. Izuku looked at the sheer, overwhelming scale of the task. He saw rusted cars, mountains of broken appliances, endless tangles of plastic and metal. A year ago, it would have seemed impossible. Now, it just looked like hard work. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice firm. He had a new resolve, forged in the fires of his own secret power, and tempered by the hope All Might had given him. But All Might, I have one condition. Tashinori raised a thin eyebrow. A condition? You're a bold one, young Midoriya. My training, it has to be for both, Izuku stated. As I clean the beach, I need to gather materials. I need time to experiment with the forge. I need to get stronger, but I also need to get smarter, more efficient. One for All will be my strength, but the forge is my mind. I can't neglect it. They have to grow together. Tashinori was quiet for a moment. He looked at Izuku, then at the endless piles of junk, and a slow, wide grin spread across his face. Of course! Of course! It's perfect! You will not just be a vessel, you will be an artisan, honing two crafts at once. Excellent, my boy! Truly excellent. And so, the dual training began. The first month was hell. Izuku's days became a grueling, monotonous cycle. Wake up before dawn, meet Tashinori at the beach. Haul, drag, and carry scrap metal until his muscles burned and his hands were raw. Go to school in a daze of exhaustion. Come back to the beach in the afternoon for another round. Then, as the sun began to set, he would retreat to his cave. Tashinori would watch, intrigued, as Izuku, covered in sweat and grime, would take a piece of the day's harvest, a copper pipe, a piece of sheet metal, a block of hardened rubber, and begin his true work. What's the project for today, young Midoriya? Tashinori asked one evening, sitting on a relatively clean overturned cooler. Analysis of the Pro Hero Air Jet, Izuku mumbled, flipping through a notebook. His quirk lets him emit focused blasts of compressed air from his palms. My theory is that it's not creating air, but rapidly pulling in and compressing the surrounding atmosphere in a specialized chamber-like organ in his hands before expelling it. He placed a dented aluminum can on the anvil. I think I can replicate the effect, but as a single, contained burst. He hefted the stone hammer. Tashinori watched his technique now. It wasn't just a blind swing. Izuku's posture, his breathing, the focus in his eyes, it was becoming a martial art form. A kata of creation. Izuku struck the can. A flash of silver-blue light. He swayed, catching himself, the drain now more familiar, more manageable. On the anvil sat a small, flat disc of polished aluminum. A propulsion disc, Izuku explained, catching his breath. He took it outside and placed it on the sand. He tapped it with his foot. With a powerful whoosh, the disc unleashed a violent burst of compressed air, sending sand flying and kicking the disc 20 feet into the air before it dissolved into dust. Incredible! Tashinori breathed. You are literally turning trash into treasure. A hero's tool from a soda can. He looked at Izuku, a thoughtful expression on his face. Your stamina cost, it seems similar, in principle, to the recoil of One for All. An output of energy that has a physical price. Perhaps by managing one, you can learn to manage the other. Their training sessions evolved. They weren't just about physical labor anymore. While Izuku hauled a rusted refrigerator, Tashinori would quiz him on quirk theory. He started giving Izuku assignments. I saw a hero last week who could magnetize non-ferrous materials, Tashinori would say. How do you think that works? Write up an analysis. Let's see what you can forge from it. The beach became their classroom and their workshop. The line between preparing for One for All and mastering the ability forged blurred until it disappeared. Moving a heavy engine block wasn't just building muscle. It was acquiring high-grade steel for forging. Untangling yards of copper wire wasn't just a chore. It was stockpiling a key conductive component. As the months wore on, Izuku's body hardened into lean, powerful muscle. The beach, once an impassable fortress of filth, began to recede. Patches of clean, golden sand started to appear, and in his cave, his collection of single-use items grew more sophisticated. He had concussive pellets, small reinforcement braces, smokescreen charms, and adhesive globs. He was building an arsenal. Finally, with 1 month to go before the UA entrance exam, they stood on the edge of the coastline. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It shone down on a pristine, beautiful stretch of beach. Every last piece of trash was gone. Izuku stood atop the very last piece, a massive, industrial-grade truck tire. He wasn't the same boy who had stumbled into a cave 10 months ago. He was taller, broader. His eyes, once filled with desperation, now held a quiet, unshakable confidence. He looked at his mentor. Tashinori Yagi was in his muscle form, a rare sight reserved for special occasions. He had a tear in his eye. He pulled out his phone and showed Izuku a picture from 10 months ago, a photo of a scrawny, crying boy who could barely move a single tire. My boy! All Might's voice was thick with emotion. You did it! You magnificent fool, you did it! Look at you! Izuku looked down at his own hands, calloused and strong. He could feel a new power thrumming beneath his skin, a dormant ocean of energy waiting for a command. One for all. But he could also feel the familiar, intellectual hum of the forge in the back of his mind, a library of blueprints ready to be built. All Might placed a hand on his shoulder. Now for your reward. He plucked a single hair from his golden mane. My DNA. Eat this. Izuku's newfound confidence briefly short-circuited. Huh! But he did it. He choked down the strand of hair, his mind reeling from the sheer absurdity of it all. He was now the 9th holder of One for All. He stood on the clean sand, the sun warming his face. He looked at the gentle waves rolling in. He had started here as a boy punishing himself for what he lacked. He was leaving as a young man defined by what he had found, and by what he could create. He was an heir to a legendary, sacred power. But he was also the master of his own. He was Izuku Midoriya, the inheritor of One for All, and the Forge Master Hero. And he was just getting started. The 10 months of training under All Might had remade Izuku Midoriya. He had been a vessel of fragile hope and nervous energy. He was now a container brimming with quiet potential, his body a coiled spring of wiry muscle, his mind a finely tuned engine of analysis. The morning of the UA entrance exam, he stood not before a mirror, but before his desk. On its worn wooden surface, laid out on a clean cloth with the precision of a surgeon preparing their instruments, was his arsenal. It wasn't much. A collection of small, unassuming objects that looked like trinkets or discarded parts. To anyone else, they were junk. To Izuku, they were the culmination of 10 months of sweat, blood, and excruciating energy expenditure. They were his ingenuity made manifest. There were a dozen small, ceramic spheres, each no bigger than a marble. They were a dull, burnt orange color, and felt slightly rough to the touch. These were his concussive pellets, forged from clay and infused with a simplified, non-lethal understanding of Bakugo's explosion quirk. They didn't generate fire or shrapnel. They simply released a sharp, disorienting blast of kinetic force upon impact. Each one had cost him the energy equivalent of a 20-minute jog. Beside them lay 3 pairs of crude, fingerless gauntlets. They were a mottled reddish-gray, forged from scrap metal and crushed rock. These were his hardened gauntlets, a direct translation of his analysis of Eijiro Kirishima's middle school debut footage. They were designed for a single, powerful impact, meant to reinforce his own fist just long enough to punch through thin metal before shattering into dust. Forging these was more draining. His arms had ached for an hour after making each pair. Next was the familiar wooden bracelet, a slightly more refined version of the one that had changed his life. This was his binding liana, his Kamui Woods imitation, his one true mobility tool. He had practiced with it relentlessly, learning to gauge the exact length of the vine by the amount of intent he pushed into it upon activation. Finally, tucked away to the side, was a small, unassuming object. It was a thin, silver-white charm, shaped like a single feather and threaded onto a simple leather cord. It was cool to the touch and weighed almost nothing. This was his last resort, his insurance policy. A featherfall charm. He had forged it after spending a week analyzing the quirk of a minor hero, Skylark, who could manipulate air currents to lighten objects. It was designed to do one thing: drastically reduce his terminal velocity for about 5 seconds. The cost to create it had been immense, leaving him bedridden for a full day. He hoped he wouldn't need it. He carefully packed the items into the specialized pouches of the tracksuit his mother had bought him, his hands steady. "Are you sure you have everything, Izuku?" Inko Midoriya asked, hovering anxiously in his doorway. Her gaze lingered on the strange objects. She still believed they were advanced support items he was testing for a school inventors club, a lie he and a very amused Tashinori had concocted. "I have everything, Mom," he said, turning to give her a reassuring smile. It felt different on his face now, less forced. "Don't worry. I'm prepared." He felt the dormant power of One for All thrumming beneath his skin, a deep, oceanic presence. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling, like holding a lightning storm in a bottle. He knew what would happen if he used it. All Might's warnings had been stark. "At your current level, A 100% smash will turn your arm into a bag of broken glass. One for all was the bomb. The ace in the hole. The final, desperate option. The ability forge, that was his skill. That was his brain, and he was determined to prove to himself, and to the world, that his brain was enough. The grand auditorium of UA was even more immense and intimidating in person. Izuku found a seat, his leg bouncing with a nervous energy he couldn't quite suppress. He ran through his plan one last time. Engage low-level threats with pellets. Use gauntlets for medium threats or obstacles. Vine for repositioning. Conserve energy. OFA is for a life-or-death situation only. Do not use the bomb to open a door. The lights dimmed, and the pro-hero present Mike burst onto the stage, his voice a physical force that rattled the room. Hello, examinees! Welcome to the UA High Entrance Exam. Can I get a yeah? Silence. Izuku barely heard the presentation. He was staring at the handout, analyzing the schematics of the 4 types of villain bots. 1-pointers looked flimsy, probably susceptible to concussive force. 2-pointers were more armored but seemed to have exposed joints. 3-pointers were heavily shielded, a real problem. And the 4th type, the 0-pointer, was listed as a massive area obstacle to be avoided. His muttering started a low, unconscious stream of tactical analysis. The 1-pointers have thin plating around the central processor. A direct hit with a pellet should be enough to short it out. 2-pointers have actuator joints at the knees and elbows. A reinforced punch there might cripple them. 3-pointers. Their armor seems to be the thickest on the front. Maybe a flanking maneuver? Or maybe a combination of a pellet to disorient, and then a punch to a weaker spot on the back. And you, with the curly hair! A loud, booming voice cut through his thoughts. Izuku jumped, his face flushing with heat. A tall, broad-shouldered young man with glasses was standing, his arm rigidly pointed at him. Tenya Ida, you have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting and unbecoming of a potential UA student. If you are not going to take this seriously, you should leave. Izuku stammered an apology, sinking low in his seat with embarrassment. The old Izuku would have been mortified for the rest of the day. This Izuku, while still flustered, felt a flicker of annoyance. He was taking this seriously. Probably more seriously than anyone else in the room. They were herded out to their designated battle centers, massive, sprawling replicas of a cityscape. Izuku stood before the towering gates, stretching his legs and taking deep, calming breaths. He could feel the stares of the other examinees. He was the kid who got called out, the nervous muttering one. They saw him as a liability. Good. Let them underestimate him. And start! Present Mick's voice blared from hidden speakers. Everyone looked around, confused. What's the matter? There are no countdowns in real battles. Run! Run! The gates flew open. While everyone else hesitated for a split second, Izuku was already moving. He sprinted into the city, his new, stronger legs eating up the ground. He had to get away from the pack, away from the inevitable chaotic scrum at the entrance where points would be fiercely contested. He rounded a corner, and came face to face with his first opponent. A 1-pointer, a spindly, green machine on wheels, whirred towards him, its single red eye glowing menacingly. For a heartbeat, his body screamed at him to use it. The instinct was primal. Power. Smash. End it. He felt the crackle of one for all surge toward his arm, a wave of golden energy. No! He commanded himself, forcing it back down. It felt like wrestling a live wire. He gritted his teeth, his hand diving into a pouch. His fingers closed around a cool, ceramic sphere. He dodged to the side as the robot swiped at him with a metallic claw. He didn't just throw the concussive pellet. He aimed. He flung it at the robot's base, right where the flimsy wheels met the central chassis. The pellet shattered with a sharp, concussive pop. That was more felt than heard. There was no fire, no smoke, just a focused wave of force that buckled the robot's axle. It tilted, its red eye flickering, and collapsed onto its side, twitching and sparking. 1 point, a synthesized voice announced in his head, a feature of the exam he hadn't been expecting. A wave of dizziness washed over him, the familiar cost of using the forge. It was minor, but it was there. He took a breath. It worked. His plan was sound. A surge of confidence bolstered him. The street ahead was a bottleneck, with several other students already engaging a group of robots. He needed a better position. He looked up. A 4-story building stood to his left. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden bracelet, slipping it onto his wrist. He focused, picturing a thick vine shooting toward the roof's ledge. He activated it. With a flash of green and the scent of fresh-cut wood, the binding liana shot from his wrist, wrapping securely around a flagpole. He gripped it, swung his body in a wide arc, and launched himself into the air. He soared over the heads of the other examinees, landing with a neat roll on the rooftop. The vine dissolved into green dust behind him. From his new vantage point, he could see the entire block. He was a predator on a perch. He spotted a 2-pointer rolling down an empty alleyway below. He leaped from the roof, dropping the 2 stories and rolling to absorb the impact. The 2-pointer swiveled to face him. Before it could attack, he was already moving. He slipped on one of the hardened gauntlets. It felt coarse and solid around his fist. He didn't aim for the armored chest. He aimed for the knee joint, just as he'd analyzed. He lunged forward, putting his weight into the punch. The sound was a jarring crunch of metal on metal. The gauntlet exploded into a cloud of reddish-gray dust upon impact, the force of the blow transferring directly into the robot's joint. The leg buckled, and the 2-pointer crashed to the ground, immobilized. 2 points, the voice confirmed. A sharper pain this time. The physical recoil of punching metal, combined with the deeper energy drain of the gauntlet, sent a throb of pain up his arm. He shook it off, a grim smile on his face. Total, 3 points. And so it began. For the next several minutes, Izuku became a phantom, a whirlwind of calculated, unconventional warfare. The other examinees fought with flashy, powerful quirks, leveling city blocks with explosions or trapping robots in ice. Izuku fought like a ghost. A flash of orange from an alleyway, and a 1-pointer would collapse. A flicker of movement on a rooftop, and a 2-pointer would be found crippled on the street below. He used his liana to navigate the urban jungle with an efficiency that left others in the dust, getting to untouched sectors of the battle center where robots roamed free. He was a walking contradiction. A one-man toolbox of strange and varied powers. In the dimly lit observation room, screens displayed feeds from every corner of the battle centers. The teachers of UA watched, their expressions ranging from bored to intrigued. That Bakugo kid has incredible power and combat sense, Cementas noted, watching the explosive boy carve a path of destruction. Over 30 points already. The Todoroki boy in Battle Center B is just as impressive, Midnight purred. Efficient and powerful. He hasn't broken a sweat. Aizawa's tired gaze, however, was locked on a different screen. It followed a small, green-haired examinee who was fighting like no one he had ever seen. What is his quirk? Aizawa asked, his voice a low monotone that cut through the chatter. All eyes turned to the screen he was indicating. They watched as Izuku, perched on a fire escape, dropped a pellet that disabled a 1-pointer, then immediately leaped down and used a strange, rocky-looking gauntlet to shatter the knee of a 2-pointer. His file is odd. Nizu, the principal, chimed in, his paws steepled before his snout. Name Izuku Midoriya. Original quirk registration, none. He was quirkless until 2 weeks ago, when a new registration was filed for a generic energy manipulation quirk. Energy manipulation? Aizawa scoffed. 1 second he's using an explosive type ability, the next it's a hardening type, and I saw him use some kind of wood generation quirk for mobility earlier. Those are 3 completely different quirk categories. No one has that kind of versatility. All Might, sitting in the back in his skeletal form, felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He resisted the urge to puff up with pride. He's doing it, he thought. He's using his head, not just his fist. He's showing them all. A very versatile young man, All Might said aloud, his voice a little too cheerful. Nizu's black eyes glinted with an almost manic glee. Indeed. A walking paradox. How wonderful! Keep a close eye on this one. Izuku checked his mental tally. 45 points. He was exhausted. The constant, low-level drain from the forge was cumulative, a debt his body was struggling to pay. His limbs felt heavy, his breath was ragged, and a dull headache throbbed behind his eyes. He had 2 pellets and 1 pair of gauntlets left. His Liana bracelet was a one-shot deal. He had to make the last few minutes count, and then the ground began to shake. A low, deafening rumble vibrated through the concrete, growing louder and louder. Buildings trembled, their windows rattling. Down the main thoroughfare, a shadow fell over the entire street. Izuku looked up, and his blood ran cold. The 0-pointer. The handout had not done it justice. It was a mechanical titan, a skyscraper-sized behemoth of dark green metal that towered over the tallest buildings in the mock city. Its single, massive red eye scanned the area, and it took a step, crushing a 4-story building under its foot as if it were a child's block. The other examinees had the same reaction, pure, unadulterated terror. The message was clear. This is not a fight. This is a force of nature. Run! Izuku's own instincts screamed at him to do the same. This was the obstacle President Mike had mentioned. His mission was to get points, not to fight a kaiju. He turned, ready to flee and hunt for any remaining smaller bots. Ow! The cry was small, almost lost in the terrified screams and the grinding of the 0-pointer's machinery. But Izuku heard it. He spun around. There, not 50 yards from the advancing robot's path, was the kind girl with the brown hair who had saved him from falling outside the gates. Achiko Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of concrete, a piece of debris from a building the 0-pointer had already damaged. She was trying desperately to push it off, but it was too heavy. Her eyes were wide with panic as she stared at the approaching metal foot, which was large enough to crush her and the entire section of street she was on. Time seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the other examinees running past her, their own survival their only concern. He saw the Titan raising its foot for another step. He saw her terrified, pleading face, and he knew he couldn't run. His mind raced, cycling through his remaining arsenal. Concussive pellets? Like throwing marbles at a battleship. Hardened gauntlet? He'd break every bone in his body before he dented its ankle. Forge something new? He was far too exhausted. The energy required to forge an item capable of even scratching that thing would kill him on the spot. His tools, his intellect, his carefully crafted arsenal, they were useless here. But he wasn't just a forger. He was in air. He took a deep breath, the dormant ocean of one for all roaring to life inside him. He remembered All Might's voice, echoing in his memory. Clench your butt cheeks and scream this from the bottom of your heart. He wasn't aiming for points anymore. He was aiming to save a life. He sprinted forward, straight towards the 0-pointer. He pushed every ounce of fear and exhaustion out of his mind, leaving only a single, crystalline objective. Smash! The word was a vow. The power answered his call. It wasn't a trickle, it was a flood. A billion stars exploded behind his eyes. Golden lightning crackled up his legs and across his torso, coalescing in his right arm. The sleeve of his tracksuit disintegrated. He bent his knees and leaped. The ground beneath him shattered, a crater forming from the sheer force of his jump. He wasn't just leaping, he was a rocket. He shot into the air, a green and gold comet, soaring 50, 100, 200 feet into the air, until he was level with the 0-pointer's monstrous head. He saw his target, the flat, armored faceplate. He pulled back his fist, his entire body screaming in protest at the untamed power coursing through it. He saw Uraraka's terrified face below. He saw All Might smiling, hopeful one in his mind. He put everything into the blow. His hope, his fear, his dream. Smash! He roared, his voice tearing through the air. The impact was apocalyptic. The sound was not a clang of metal, but a deafening, explosive boom that shattered every window for 3 blocks. Izuku's fist, channeling the sacred power of 8 generations of heroes, connected with the robot's head. The thick armor plating buckled, warped, and then blew outwards in a shower of shredded metal. The 0-pointer's head exploded. For a glorious, triumphant second, Izuku hung in the air, silhouetted against the fireball of the destroyed robot. He had done it. Then, the price came due. Agony. White-hot, absolute agony. He looked down and saw his right arm, a mangled, purple ruin, bent at an impossible angle. The recoil hadn't stopped there. The force had traveled back through his body, and he heard and felt the sickening snap of the bones in both of his legs. The power that had made him a hero for a single second had utterly shattered him. The triumphant moment was over. Gravity reasserted its claim. He began to plummet. The ground rushed up to meet him, a promise of a final, fatal impact. He was in too much pain to scream. His vision was graying out. So this is it, he thought, a strange calm settling over him. I saved her, but I couldn't save myself. But then, another voice, the stubborn, analytical part of him that never shut up, whispered in the back of his mind. Plan C. The insurance policy. The featherfall charm. His right arm was a useless wreck. His legs were broken. His left arm was his only hope, but it too had suffered from the shockwave of his own punch, the bones fractured. He couldn't make a fist. He couldn't grip. Pain was a roaring ocean, but his will was a lighthouse. He forced his mangled left hand toward the pouch on his chest. His broken fingers fumbled, unable to grasp the thin leather cord. He was falling faster. The ground was so close. In a last, desperate, animalistic act of self-preservation, he bent his head and used his teeth. He snagged the cord, yanking the charm free from its pouch. It dangled before his face, a tiny silver feather against the backdrop of rushing concrete. He just had to activate it. It didn't require a button, just a pulse of intent. He focused the last dregs of his consciousness, the last flicker of his life force, on the charm. Lighten. Slow. Survive. A soft, melodic chime echoed in the air, a sound almost no one else heard. A gentle, invisible gust of wind enveloped him. His terrifying, terminal velocity plunge was arrested. He didn't stop falling, but his descent slowed dramatically. He was no longer a stone. He was a leaf, drifting on the breeze. He still hit the ground with a painful, jarring thud that sent waves of agony through his broken body, but it wasn't a fatal impact. It was a survivable one. His vision tunneled to a single point of light, and then faded to black, the last thing he heard being the blaring siren that signaled the end of the exam. When he woke, it was to the scent of antiseptic and the gentle, puckering sensation of his skin knitting itself back together. He was in a clean white room. Recovery girl was by his side, planting a kiss on his forehead. You're a real piece of work, Sonny. The old hero chided gently. I haven't seen a self-destructive quirk like that since, well, for a long time. But to have your body so thoroughly broken and then, nothing, a few scrapes from the landing. How did you survive that fall? Izuku just groaned, his head pounding. A moment later, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was Uraraka. Excuse me, she said timidly. I wanted to thank you. You saved my life. She bowed deeply. I went to present Mike and asked if I could give you some of my points. I didn't get that many, but Izuku, still groggy, just stared. Before he could respond, the door burst open and Present Mike himself strode in. Give you his points? The hero boomed. Little lady, there's no need for that. A hero doesn't act for points, he grinned, pointing a thumb at a stunned Izuku. But in this exam, good deeds are rewarded. The hidden metric. Rescue points. For saving another examinee at great personal risk, you earn 60, count M, 60 rescue points. Izuku's mind, still fuzzy, did the math. 45 villain points, plus 60 rescue points. You passed with flying colors. Present Mike yelled. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya, to your Hero Academia. Izuku stared, his vision blurring with tears. He had passed. He was in. He looked at his own hands, now fully healed but still remembering the feeling of both shattering bones and creating miracles. He had used the power he was given, but he had only survived because of the power he had made. It worked, he thought, a wave of profound relief and triumph washing over him. My plan worked. He was a hero of two powers. And his journey was only just beginning. The first day at UA High felt less like a dream and more like a high-stakes hallucination. Izuku walked through the massive, sunlit halls, the iconic U and S-shaped windows casting long shadows on the polished floors. Every face he passed was a new variable, a new quirk to analyze, a new potential rival or ally. He found his way to the colossal door of Class 1A, a door built to accommodate the most diverse and extreme of body types, and took a deep, steadying breath. He slid the door open and was immediately met with a familiar, tense scene. Tenya Ida, the bespectacled boy from the exam hall, was rigidly admonishing a surly, ash-blonde boy with his feet propped disrespectfully on his desk. Bakugo Katsuki. Izuku's heart did a nervous flutter kick against his ribs. He hadn't spoken to Bakugo since the sludge villain incident. He had seen him at the exam, or rather, he had seen the distant explosions and smoke plumes that signaled his destructive presence. Now here they were, classmates. A decade of history, of fear and admiration, of pain and pity, was compressed into the space between them. Don't you think that's disrespectful to the upperclassmen and the craftspeople who made these desks? Ida chopped the air with his hand, his voice a staccato burst of indignation. Bakugo just smirked, a cruel, lazy expression. Like I care. What junior high you from, you four-eyed extra? Before Ada could launch into another tirade, his eyes caught sight of Izuku hesitating in the doorway. He immediately strode over, his movements stiff and precise. It's you! Ida declared. The curly-haired one. I must commend you. You grasped the true nature of the exam, while I did not. I misjudged you, and for that, I offer my sincerest apologies. He bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. Izuku, flustered, waved his hands frantically. Oh no, it's fine. I didn't realize it either, I just... His words trailed off as Bakugo's crimson eyes finally locked onto him. The lazy smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief, which quickly curdled into incandescent rage. Deku? Bakugo's voice was a low, dangerous growl. The entire class, which had been buzzing with introductory chatter, fell silent. What the hell are you doing here? This is the hero course. Did you come to clean the floors? The familiar barb, meant to wound and humiliate, felt different now. Less like a fatal blow and more like a deflected jab. Izuku straightened his back, meeting Bakugo's glare with a steadiness that surprised even himself. I passed the exam, Kakin, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Just like you. Bakugo's eyes widened, a flicker of something, shock, confusion, fury, flashing within them. Passed? How the hell could a quirkless, useless pebble like you pass the exam? He stood up, the legs of his chair scraping violently against the floor. Small, crackling sparks began to pop in his palms. You cheated, didn't you? You must have. Before Izuku could respond, a cheerful voice cut in. Oh, it's you! The plain-looking one! It was Achiko Uraraka, the girl he had saved. She beamed at him, her cheeks rosy. That punch was amazing! Just BM! And then you went all swoosh and landed so softly. It was incredible! Her words only added fuel to Bakugo's fire. Punch? Landed softly? It didn't add up. The Deku he knew was a punching bag, not a puncher. If you're all just here to make friends, you can pack up your things and leave. The voice came from the floor. A yellow sleeping bag, looking for all the world like a giant, exhausted caterpillar, was lying just inside the door. A man with tired, bloodshot eyes, long black hair, and a capture weapon that looked like a scarf draped around his neck slowly emerged from it. Welcome to the hero course, Shota Aizawa said, his voice a monotone dirge. He took a long, slow slurp from a juice pouch. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. My name is Shota Aizawa. I'll be your homeroom teacher. He pulled a UA gym uniform from his sleeping bag and tossed it onto his desk. Put these on and meet me on the training grounds. We're having a quirk apprehension test. The locker room was a cacophony of nervous energy. As Izuku changed, he carefully transferred the contents of his hidden pouches to the gym uniform. He had come prepared. He didn't know what a quirk apprehension test entailed, but he knew Aizawa. Pro hero, eraser head. Quirk, erasure. Can nullify the quirks of others just by looking at them. The effect stops when he blinks. It was one of his most detailed analysis files. The thought of facing a teacher who could, with a single glance, turn him back into the quirkless boy he used to be, was terrifying. But terror was a good motivator for preparation. He had brought 2 propulsion stones, forged from asphalt and stone, designed for a single burst of forward momentum. He also had a specially crafted item he'd spent 2 sleepless nights perfecting, a reinforcement brace. It was a small, dense ring of forged tungsten and carbon fiber, designed to fit over his index finger. It was based on his analyses of dozens of reinforcement and shock absorption quirks, a complex lattice of interwoven principles designed to do one thing: contain and channel a catastrophic release of force for a fraction of a second. It was his desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable power of one for all. On the field, the class looked around confused. A quirk assessment? Uraraka asked. But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? UA isn't bound by pointless traditions, Aizawa said, his bored gaze sweeping over them. Here in the hero course, we don't have time for that stuff. You've all been using your quirks since you were kids. Now it's time to see what you can really do with them in a quantifiable way. He singled out the person who had scored highest on the entrance exam. Bakugo. Bakugo. What was your farthest throw with a softball in junior high? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa said, tossing him a ball. Do whatever you want, as long as you stay in the circle. Bakugo grinned, a feral, predatory expression. He wound up, and as he threw the ball, he ignited a massive explosion in his palm. Daithai! He screamed, the word echoing across the field. The ball rocketed into the sky, a tiny speck against the blue. Aizawa held up a small device. A number appeared on the screen. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited chatter. We can use our quirks for real! This is gonna be so fun! Aizawa's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in them. Fun? You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Idiots. His lips curled into a humorless smile. Today, you will compete in 8 physical tests. The student who ranks last in total results will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled on the spot. Panic rippled through the class. Izuku felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his stomach. Expelled on the first day? This was a nightmare. He had 2 powers, but one was a self-destruct button and the other was a secret, finite resource that drained his life force. He was at a massive disadvantage. The first test was the 50-meter dash. Izuku watched as his classmates used their quirks to get incredible times. Ida's engines propelled him like a missile. Aoyama's naval laser shot him backward across the finish line. Bakugo used controlled explosions to fly. Izuku was paired against Tsuyu Azui, the frog-like girl. He got into the starting blocks, his heart hammering. He couldn't use one for all. Even a 1% full cowling, a technique he and All Might hadn't even begun to explore, was too risky. He had to rely on the forge. As he crouched, he subtly attached the 2 small, flat propulsion stones to the heels of his gym shoes. They were barely noticeable, just dark gray discs on his red sneakers. Ready, go! The starting robot chirped. As he pushed off, he saw it. Aizawa was staring directly at him, his black hair floating, his eyes glowing a menacing red. Erasure. Izuku felt a strange, cold sensation, like a tap being turned off inside him. The deep, thrumming well of one for all vanished. He was, for that moment, truly quirkless. The other students gasped. They all expected him to use that monstrous strength from the exam. They expected him to shatter the ground and disappear in a blur of motion. Instead, he just ran, but as his feet left the starting blocks, he sent a pulse of intent to the stones on his heels. Whoomph! 2 sharp, powerful bursts of compressed air erupted from the stones, propelling him forward with a violent shove. It wasn't as fast as Ida or Bakugo, but it gave him a massive initial burst of speed that a normal person could never achieve. He shot across the 50 meters, his legs pumping furiously to maintain the momentum. He crossed the line in 5.58 seconds. It wasn't a spectacular time, but it was far from the worst. The propulsion stones, their purpose served, crumbled into fine black dust inside his shoes. He stumbled to a halt, panting, a wave of dizziness from the forge's cost washing over him. The field was silent. Everyone was staring at him with open-mouthed confusion. Aizawa's eyes narrowed, his quirk deactivating as he blinked. The feeling of one for all rushed back into Izuku's body. He erased my quirk, Aizawa thought, a deep frown creasing his brow. So what was that? A support item? The rules don't forbid them, but his file listed energy manipulation, not propulsion boots. What is his power? Bakugo's reaction was far less analytical. He stormed over to Izuku, his face a mask of pure rage, his hands smoking. Deku! He bellowed, his voice cracking with fury. What the hell was that? Your quirk is some kind of super strength. I saw it at the exam. Since when did you have 2 quirks, you damn nerd? Keikaken, calm down. Izuku stammered, backing away. They're just, support items. Experimental ones, lies. Bakugo roared. He lunged, his hand reaching for Izuku's collar, an explosion already building in his palm. Before he could make contact, Aizawa's capture weapon shot out, wrapping tightly around Bakugo's torso and arm, immobilizing him. Stand down, Aizawa ordered, his voice dangerously low, his eyes glowing red again. Stop acting like a child. We don't have time for your temper tantrums. He released Bakugo, who stumbled back, seething but subdued. The rest of the tests were a struggle for Izuku. Grip strength, standing long jump, repeated side steps. He performed them all quirkless, relying on the physical strength he had built cleaning the beach. His scores were mediocre, placing him firmly near the bottom of the rankings. He knew it was all going to come down to the final test, the ball throw. He watched as Uraraka got an infinity score by making the ball weightless. He knew he couldn't compete with that. He had to do something spectacular. He had to use one for all, but he couldn't afford to break his arm again. Not now. Not with Aizawa watching, ready to expel him. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy in his hand. He could feel the weight of every gaze on him. Aizawa, Bakugo, Ida, Uraraka. They were all waiting to see the monstrous power that had destroyed the zero-pointer. He took a deep breath, focusing inward. He remembered his training with all might, the feeling of the power flowing through him. Don't let it explode. Channel it. Focus it. He pictured all the power of One for All, an entire universe of energy, not flooding his entire arm, but flowing down a single, narrow channel to the very tip of his index finger. He wound up, mimicking Bakugo's throw. And as his arm swung forward, he released the floodgates. He was about to unleash the power when he felt that cold, hollowing sensation again. Aizawa's erasure. The torrent of One for All vanished, and his throw was pathetically weak. The ball landed with a soft thud just a few feet in front of him. 46 meters. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his capture weapon billowing around him, his eyes burning red. It's illogical to have a quirk that powerful if you can't control it. You'd be a liability on the battlefield, constantly needing to be saved after a single attack. You cannot be a hero with that kind of power. Izuku stood frozen in the circle, Aizawa's words cutting deeper than any of Bakugo's insults. Because they were true. But Aizawa's hair fell as he blinked, and the warmth of One for All flooded back into Izuku. It seems your power has returned. You have one more chance. Make it count. Aizawa was testing him. He wasn't just testing his power, he was testing his potential. His control. Could he overcome his limits? Izuku nodded, his resolve hardening. He had a plan for this. He had the reinforcement brace. He subtly slipped the small, dark ring of forged tungsten and carbon onto the index finger of his throwing hand. It felt cool and dense. He took his stance again, the ball held tight. He looked at his finger. The brace wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol. A symbol of his 2 powers working in concert. The power he was given, and the power he had made. He focused again. He drew on One for All, feeling the golden lightning crackle. He channeled it, with pinpoint precision, down his arm, through his hand, and into the tip of his index finger. But this time, he focused on the brace. He willed it to do its job. Contain. Reinforce. Channel. He threw the ball. As his finger was about to make contact, he released the power. Smash! The explosion of force was immense. A hurricane of wind erupted from his fingertip, carving a trench in the ground and blasting a sonic boom across the field. The ball became a white-hot projectile, screaming into the sky with even more force than Bakugo's throw. The reinforcement brace did its job, but only for a fraction of a nanosecond. It held the catastrophic energy in a contained shape, focusing it into the ball instead of letting it shatter his arm. But the cost was its own existence. The moment the energy passed through it, the brace glowed brilliantly, and then exploded, vaporizing into a cloud of microscopic dust. The backlash was still immense. The focused energy, instead of breaking his entire arm, shattered only the finger it was channeled through. An agonizing, searing pain shot up his arm, and he looked down to see his index finger was a swollen, purple, broken mess. But it was only one finger. The rest of his arm was fine. He was still standing. He was still functional. He gritted his teeth against the pain, a wide, triumphant, slightly manic grin spreading across his face as he turned to face his teacher. "Mr. Aizawa," he said through clenched teeth, holding up his broken finger. "I can still move." Aizawa stared, a slow, genuine smile, a rare and terrifying sight, spreading across his own face. "This kid," he murmured, holding up the device. The screen read, 705.3 meters, 1/10 of a meter farther than Bakugo. The class exploded. "He beat Bakugo! His finger is swelling! What kind of power is that?" But one person wasn't cheering. Bakugo stood frozen, his jaw slack, his entire worldview shattering. Deku. Quirkless, useless, pathetic Deku had a quirk. A monstrously powerful one. And he had just beaten him. But that wasn't all. He had seen it. The quick, subtle movement before the throw. The flash of light from Deku's finger that wasn't part of the quirk's energy. It was something else. The propulsion stones from the dash, the strange, shattered gauntlet from the exam, and now this. It wasn't two quirks. It was something more complex. More infuriating. Deku wasn't just powerful. He was resourceful. He was hiding things. Bakugo's shock morphed into a volcanic, silent rage. The humiliation was absolute. He didn't scream. He didn't explode. He just stared, his red eyes promising a reckoning. The rivalry he had always seen as a one-sided stomping ground had just become a war. Izuku, clutching his broken finger, felt a profound sense of victory. He had faced his teacher's logic, his rival's power, and his own limitations, and he had overcome them all. He had used both of his powers in harmony, proving that his mind was just as important as his muscle. Later, as Aizawa revealed the expulsion was just a logical deception, to bring out their best, Izuku stood with his classmates, his finger wrapped by Recovery Girl. He had placed 10th out of 20, a respectable mid-tier ranking achieved through a combination of bottom-of-the-barrel scores and one spectacular, top-of-the-class result. He had survived his first day. But as he glanced across the field and saw Bakugo's smoldering, hateful glare, he knew that the quirk apprehension test was just the first, easiest trial. The rage of a rival scorned would be a far greater test to overcome.